The moment the Crown prosecutor said my name in that courtroom, my aunt's coffee cup slipped right out of her hand and hit the floor. I didn't look at her. I was already walking to the witness stand, and I could feel my uncle's eyes on my back, like two burning points of pressure between my shoulder blades. He'd spent 4 years calling me the family's greatest embarrassment. He'd said it at Christmas dinners, at my grandmother's birthday, at a backyard barbecue where half the neighborhood could hear. She dropped out of Ryerson. She's living in that tiny place in Parkdale. She doesn't even have a real job, and now here I was. RCMP Staff Sergeant Adele Fontaine. And the man at the defense table, the man in the $6,000 suit with the Bay Street lawyer beside him, was my mother's older brother. Let me go back to where it actually started. It was Easter weekend, 3 years before that courtroom morning. I was 28 years old, and sitting at the end of my uncle's dining room table in Oakville, in a sweater I'd bought on clearance, at a Winners on Queen West. The house was one of those newer builds just off Lakeshore. 4 bedrooms, a finished basement with a wet bar, the kind of place where every surface is either marble or quartz, and nothing ever looks actually lived in. My uncle, Reginald, had made his money in mortgage lending, not at a bank, through a private lending company. He'd built himself over 20 years, a company called Meridian Capital Funding, which had grown into something that operated across Ontario and parts of Alberta and sounded, when he described it to people at parties, completely legitimate. My cousin Stephanie had just been accepted to the MBA program at Rotman. My cousin Jonathan was finishing articling at a firm in the financial district and had already been told he'd be offered an associate position. And me, I had left my second year of the criminology program at Ryerson 18 months earlier, moved into a one-bedroom apartment near Dufferin and Bloor, and was, as far as anyone in that room believed, working part-time at a coffee shop on College Street, while trying to figure out what to do with my life. Reginald didn't ask me a question directly. He rarely did. He just made a comment, to no one in particular, while passing the glazed ham. It's a shame when people don't follow through on things. My Aunt Paulette laughed softly. My mother, sitting beside me, went very still. I said nothing. I pressed my knee against hers under the table, and she pressed back. What nobody at that Easter dinner knew was that I hadn't left school, because I couldn't handle it. 18 months earlier, I'd been doing a research practicum for a criminology seminar, analyzing financial crime patterns for a prof who had a contract with the Ontario Securities Commission. I wasn't supposed to stumble into anything real. It was supposed to be data analysis, pattern recognition, academic, but I kept pulling on a thread in a set of private mortgage transactions that had been flagged in a civil lawsuit, and the thread didn't end. The appraisal values on a cluster of properties in the Mississauga and Brampton area were inflated. Sometimes by 40%, sometimes more. The same private lender appeared across dozens of transactions, the same 2 appraisers, and the lending company, when I traced it back through Ontario corporate registry filings, had a director whose name I recognized immediately. Meridian Capital Funding. Director, Reginald Beaulieu. I sat in the library on campus for 2 hours before I could make myself do anything with that information. Then I sent an email to the professor. She forwarded it, with my permission, to a contact at the RCMP Financial Integrity Unit. A staff sergeant named Donna Ferris called me 4 days later. I left my program the following week. Not because I was in danger, not immediately, but because Donna explained that if I stayed enrolled and my name stayed attached to academic work, touching this particular area, it would create problems for what might become an active investigation. She needed me to go quiet, to become someone no one would look at twice. Can you do that? She asked. I told her I'd grown up watching my uncle make people feel invisible. I had some experience on the receiving end. I moved to Parkdale. I got the coffee shop job. I started meeting with Donna's team once a week, in an office above a dry cleaner on Dundas West that had no signage on the door. The thing about working a family fraud investigation from the inside is that every gathering becomes work. Every Christmas becomes a data collection exercise. Every birthday dinner is a surveillance opportunity dressed up in nice clothes. I got very good at being unremarkable. I laughed at my uncle's jokes. I let my Aunt Paulette give me the number of her hairdresser, because she thought maybe a fresh look would help my confidence. I sat at the far end of every table, and I watched. That Easter weekend, I watched Reginald take 3 phone calls during dinner. He always stepped onto the back deck, which had a view of the lake. The second time he went out, I excused myself to refill the breadbasket and stood near the kitchen window. I couldn't hear words, but I could see his posture change. The way his shoulders came up, the way he turned away from the door, even though there was no one else outside. I'd learned to read him the way you learn to read weather. After dinner, he found me in the hallway near the guest bathroom. You know, Adele, he said, in the particular tone he used when he was pretending to be generous, I've been thinking about you. I could use someone with a good eye for detail in my admin office. Part-time, nothing glamorous, but it would be something on your resume. He smiled, the smile of a man who believes he's doing you a favor by noticing you exist. Think about it. I said I would. I drove home and typed a 6-page contact report and filed it by 11 o'clock that night. I want to tell you about my cousin Stephanie. She was the one everyone compared me to. Rotman MBA, ambitious, smart in the way that announces itself in rooms. We hadn't been close growing up. There were 6 years between us and we'd moved in entirely different orbits. But 2 months after that Easter dinner, she texted me and asked if I wanted to get lunch. Somewhere quiet, she wrote. Not near the house. We met at a Vietnamese place on St. Clair, a Tuesday afternoon. She was already there when I arrived, and she'd chosen a table in the back corner away from the window. She had her hands folded on top of the table, and she looked like she hadn't slept properly in some time. I need to ask you something, she said, and I need you to be honest, even if the honest answer is something you can't actually tell me. Okay, I said. Are you looking into my dad's business? The restaurant was small and warm and smelled like lemongrass. I looked at her carefully. She looked back at me with the eyes of someone who has been carrying something heavy for long enough that they've stopped expecting anyone to offer to help. What makes you ask that? I said. She exhaled slowly. Because I've been paying attention, and because I found something 8 months ago that I don't know what to do with. What Stephanie showed me over the next hour reoriented everything. She'd been working part-time in her father's admin office the previous summer, doing data entry to earn tuition money before her MBA program started. She hadn't been given access to anything sensitive, but she'd been in the office alone one afternoon and had accidentally opened a shared drive folder that wasn't meant for her. Inside it were loan approval documents with appraisal reports attached. She didn't fully understand what she was looking at, but she'd taken screenshots on her phone before she closed it, because something felt wrong and she didn't know what else to do. She'd been sitting on those screenshots for 8 months. My boyfriend has been talking to my dad about investing, she said. His parents gave him money when his grandfather died. $60,000. He thinks my dad's company is a safe vehicle. I can't let him put that money into something that... She stopped, pressed her lips together. I don't even know exactly what it is, but it's wrong. I can see that it's wrong. I can help, I told her. But Stephanie, you need to understand what it means to hand this over. It doesn't stay between us. It becomes evidence. She looked at the table for a moment. Then she looked at me. I know. I've known that since I found it. I just needed to find someone I actually trusted. She paused. You know, I always thought it was strange that you left school. You were the one who could hold an entire argument in your head at once. Every family debate, every disagreement, you always had the structure of it mapped before anyone else even knew what they were arguing about. My dad always seemed more comfortable when you weren't in the room. I noticed that, even when I was a kid. She looked at me. He dismissed you, but he never fully turned his back on you, like he was keeping track. I told her that people rarely guard against threats they've already decided don't exist. I'll compress the middle part because what took the longest isn't what makes the story. What I'll tell you is what Donna's team eventually pieced together, and what I came to understand over 2 more years of meetings above the dry cleaner on Dundas West. Reginald had been running inflated appraisal fraud through Meridian Capital Funding for over a decade. The mechanism was methodical. He worked with 2 independent appraisers, both licensed, both credible on paper, who produced valuations on residential and mixed-use properties that were 20 to 50% above actual market value. Those inflated appraisals went to mortgage brokers, some of whom were complicit, some of whom weren't, and to 2 loan officers at a regional credit union in the Hamilton area, who approved private and secondary mortgages based on the fraudulent numbers. The fees generated were laundered through a property management company. Reginald owned jointly with a man in Calgary and through a charitable foundation his company had sponsored, called the Meridian Community Housing Initiative, which had a very professional website and had sponsored 3 real charity golf tournaments and donated actual money to a real food bank in Brampton, which is part of what made it so difficult to see clearly from the outside. My Aunt Paulette managed the foundation's accounts. Donna confirmed early on that she hadn't understood what she was handling. But Reginald had used her name on documents she'd never reviewed, and her signature, digitized from an older legal form, appeared on 3 transfer authorizations she had never actually signed. There was something else. My father ran a small renovation contracting business, licensed insured, the kind of company that does kitchen renos and basement finishing for Hume homes in Etobicoke and Scarborough. 2 years before the arrests, Reginald had offered him subcontracting work on a cluster of properties Meridian managed, legitimate-looking agreements, reasonable rates. My father was between contracts and needed the income. He took the work. He did real work, actual renovations, actual invoices, actual receipts. The properties were fraudulent assets, and the invoice payments were functioning as a layer of money laundering inside a system my father had no knowledge of. When Donna told me, I was sitting in her office on a Wednesday afternoon in November. I didn't say anything for a moment. Then I asked her what it meant for him. Nothing permanent, she said. We can show the invoices are legitimate. His exposure is documentable. But we need you to know, because it affects how we structure the testimony. I drove home and sat in my car outside my apartment building for 40 minutes. I thought about calling my mother. I didn't. I went upstairs and made tea and filed my contact report and went to bed. The arrests happened in April. 14 people across 3 provinces. Reginald was picked up at a breakfast meeting at a hotel in downtown Toronto, near Union Station. His lawyer, the Bay Street one, arrived within the hour. I wasn't at the arrest. I was in a prep room at the courthouse, going over documents with the Crown's office, getting ready for what would become 9 days on the witness stand. The defense approach was predictable. I had a grudge. I had manufactured or distorted evidence to settle a personal score related to years of family resentment. I was motivated by jealousy of more successful cousins and a pathological need for validation I'd never received at family gatherings. Reginald's lawyer used the word bitter 11 times during the cross-examination. I kept count because counting gave me something to do with my hands under the table. He also implied, delicately, that a young woman who couldn't finish a university degree and was working at a coffee shop wasn't a credible interpreter of complex financial documentation. What he couldn't argue away was the paper trail Donna's team had reconstructed over 3 years. The wire transfer records, the appraisal documents cross-referenced against actual sales data from MPAC and the Toronto Regional Real Estate Board. The screenshots Stephanie had taken on her phone in her father's office. The testimony of a former Meridian loan processor who had cooperated with the investigation in exchange for a reduced charge, and the testimony of the 2 complicit appraisers who had separately negotiated plea agreements and turned over their internal communications. Reginald was convicted on 19 counts, including mortgage fraud, money laundering, and breach of trust. He was sentenced to 11 years. My Aunt Paulette received immunity in exchange for her testimony and full cooperation. She provided records, answered every question, and was on the stand for 3 days. The foundation was dissolved. Every misdirected dollar was ordered returned. My father's contracting business was audited completely. Every invoice, every payment, every receipt. His involvement was documented as entirely unwitting, and his name was formally cleared of any connection to the fraud. Donna called him directly on the afternoon the audit was concluded. I wasn't there for the call, but my mother told me he cried. She said it was the first time she'd seen him cry since his own father died. He didn't fully understand what I had been doing for the previous 3 years until that phone call. Neither did she. The hardest moment wasn't the 9 days of testimony. It wasn't even watching Reginald's face when the jury foreman read the verdict. It was Stephanie. She was in the hallway outside the courtroom afterward, standing very still, her coat folded over her arm, not moving toward the exit, and not moving toward anyone. I went to her and she turned and put her forehead against my shoulder and cried in a way that was almost completely silent. We stood there for a while. Was it the right thing? She asked eventually. I thought about the answer I was supposed to give. The clean one. The one with no doubt in it. It was the necessary thing, I said. I think they're usually the same. But not always. She nodded. He's still my dad. I know, he's going to be there when I graduate. I know. I'm sorry. She wiped her face carefully with the back of her hand. I keep thinking about all the people I don't know. The ones who got hurt. I thought about the ones I did know. There was a couple in Hamilton, Doris and Albert, retired teachers, who had taken out a secondary mortgage through a Meridian-connected broker to fund renovations on a rental property they'd owned for 30 years. The appraisal value had been inflated so significantly that the loan exceeded what the property could actually secure. When the fraud collapsed, the loan defaulted, and they spent 2 years in proceedings to prevent a forced sale. They came to the sentencing hearing. They sat in the gallery near the back. When the sentence was read, Albert reached over and took Doris's hand, and she closed her eyes for a long moment. I had memorized their file the week before the trial. I thought about them often. I'm full-time RCMP now. Not working undercover, not handling sources. Donna Ferris is my direct supervisor, and is still the most rigorous thinker I've ever worked beside, which I tell her sometimes, and she dismisses every time. I don't talk about the Beaulieu case much. People who followed the coverage ask me sometimes whether the personal cost was worth it, whether taking down family means something different than taking down strangers. I don't have a clean answer for that. I'm not sure clean answers are available in situations like this one. What I know is that Doris and Albert kept their house. I know that a 26-year-old woman in Brampton who had bought her first property through a Meridian-linked transaction, a small semi-detached, the first thing she had ever owned, got to keep hers too, after 2 years of uncertainty that she described in a victim impact statement as the most frightening experience of her life. She didn't look at me when I walked past her in the hallway outside the courtroom. She didn't need to. She had her statement, and she had read it aloud, and she had been heard. My uncle spent those years at every family dinner, calling me a woman who had given up. He wasn't wrong about what he saw. From the outside, I looked exactly like someone who had stopped trying. That's what made it work. I've learned this, doing this job. The assumption that someone has already failed is one of the most powerful covers a person can have. People stop watching what they've already dismissed. They stop guarding against threats they've already categorized as irrelevant. My uncle sat across from me, at a dozen family dinners over 3 years, and never once considered that I might be the most dangerous person at the table. He should have paid closer attention to the quiet one,